Hello there, fans of the Supreme Duo channel. It's Applewhite here, and I'm going to be coming at you with another video. Now, this one is going to be used as the basis for the next videos we do in the future. To explain that simply, it just means that the video I'm recording right now will be a reference point in future videos that Victor and I will be making. So, pay attention, or don't. I'm going to be linking it in other videos anyway, so do what you will. You have free will. I can't control you, and I don't really want to. That being said, the topic and subject matter of this video is Dragon Ball continuity. And I think it's a pretty interesting topic. I watched a video by, I think his name is Ivan Krolo, on the subject before, and it really interested me. And I wanted to do my own video on it since it'll be relevant in the future. So this video will have two sections in it. I'll explain canon in Dragon Ball, as in what's canon and what's considered not canon, and the confusion people give with the word canon and the word continuity. I'll just briefly discuss timelines in Dragon Ball, and then I'll bring it all together by discussing timelines and how they affect continuity. So let's get started. Alright, so I use the word continuity to describe, Dragon Ball canons. So, for example, Dragon Ball Super and Dragon Ball GT take place in different continuities. They are not in the same continuity. The events of Dragon Ball Super do not predate the events of Dragon Ball GT. The events of Dragon Ball GT do not follow the events of Dragon Ball Super, etc., etc. And that's usually where people use the word canon. So when people say Dragon Ball GT isn't canon, they're saying that it's not in the same continuity as Dragon Ball Super. And that's really just what they're trying to say. Now, to briefly explain why I think this is a bad way to describe things, it's really simple. If you look at it from the lens of like a comic book fan, so in the comics, when you're looking at comics, every comic that comes out is canon. They're all in continuity. They're real comics. Those events did take place. You just say they aren't canon to a certain character. So I'm a person who does respect threads. I'm currently doing a bunch of Spider-Man respect threads for debating purposes, clearly. But if I were to use a feat from Ultimate Spider-Man, the one from the 1610 universe, I couldn't apply it to Peter Parker in the 616 universe without proper scaling reasons, because they're not in the same continuity. That 15-year-old Peter Parker is different from the 15-year-old Peter Parker in the Silver Age. And that's really how it works in Dragon Ball as well. So, Goku is Goku in GT, and Goku is Goku in Dragon Ball Super. They're both Goku, and they're both official products made for the Dragon Ball Dragon Ball franchise. However, they're not in the same continuity, so you can't apply things that happen to Dragon Ball Super Goku to Dragon Ball GT Goku. And usually when people use the word canon, that's what they mean. They're saying that it's not in the same continuity. But personally, the way I look at it is everything in continuity is canon. It's just not all canon to one another, depending on which continuity you're discussing at that time. A little confusing, I know, from the way I phrased it, but I promise as the video goes on, it'll be a lot easier to follow, and you'll understand what I'm saying a lot better, and it'll be a lot more clear. So, the way people usually frame it is pretty simple, and I'll explain how it's framed in continuity sense right now. So, you start with the Dragon Ball minus manga. Alright, that's Toriyama's official story for Bardock, the origin of Son Goku, Kakaroto, however you want to say it. That's the starting point for Dragon Ball according to Toriyama. So you go from Dragon Ball minus, following that continuity, you get to the Dragon Ball Z manga. And then you go from the Dragon Ball Z manga to either the Dragon Ball Super anime or the Dragon Ball Super manga. Now this is where things get kind of tricky. Oh yeah, you can also go to Dragon Ball GT, but I'll explain why you don't in a minute. So, the reason things get kind of tricky here is it's very simple. It's very simple. So, and Dragon Ball Super anime includes filler scenes. Not many, but just enough. Like the Bulma Ginyu filler. It has a filler character, Gregory. Things like that. So those small details keep it from being in the same continuity as the manga. But it also doesn't have enough filler to make it a direct sequel to Dragon Ball Kai, or Dragon Ball Z anime especially. But the way I look at it is we go Dragon Ball minus, Dragon Ball Kai, Dragon Ball Super anime. That's my personal interpretation. It doesn't line up exactly like I said because there's not enough filler in the Dragon Ball Super anime. There's not enough filler to tie it to Kai, which, even though it had less filler, still had filler in it. For example, the hell shown in Kai contradicts the hell that Frieza experiences, and that whole shebang. But I do think the most consistent thing is to say that Dragon Ball Super anime is a sequel to Dragon Ball Kai. Plus, it kind of helps my own personal headcanon, because I don't really like Kai that much, and I don't like Dragon Ball Super's anime, so it lines up perfectly. And then you can say that the Dragon Ball Minus manga leads to Dragon Ball Z manga / Dragon Ball manga, and then that leads to Dragon Ball Super manga, which, if I'm recalling correctly, does not include Gregory, so it doesn't contradict the manga at all, so you could literally place it between the end of Z with no contradictions currently. As it currently stands, the storyline does not contradict the Z manga, unlike the Dragon Ball Super anime, which contradicts it more than it contradicts Dragon Ball Kai, in my opinion. And then, of course, you go with the episode of Bardock, the Bardock special, and then you go from the Bardock special to, what do you call it? You go from the Bardock special to Dragon Ball anime to the Dragon Ball Z anime to Dragon Ball GT. And that includes all the filler and whatnot. And then certain movies are canon to GT. A lot of people argue about which movies are canon and which aren't, but keep in mind, they're all in continuity. You just have to figure out if they're in the same continuity as Dragon Ball GT. It's all, as long as it's an official work, it's all canon, but it may not all be in the same continuity, in that sense, canon to another part. So I hope that really explains how I view continuity. So I'll go over it again briefly one more time so we all understand what I'm talking about. So Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Super are all canon because they're all official works made for the Dragon Ball franchise. However, they're all separate continuities, and from there, looking at them as separate continuities, you need to determine what is canon to what. So in my own personal interpretation, the thing I found to fit best, we go episode of Bardock, Dragon Ball anime, Dragon Ball Z anime, Dragon Ball GT. Some of the movies take place in between. You can determine for yourselves which ones those are. Next, Dragon Ball Minus, Dragon Ball Anime, Dragon Ball Kai, Dragon Ball Z Kai, Dragon Ball Super, Dragon Ball Minus manga, Dragon Ball manga, Dragon Ball Super manga. Boom. That's how I view the continuity of Dragon Ball. And this will be important for the next few videos that we do, because we're going to be talking about different continuities and the differences between them, and so it's important to understand the reference point from which we'll be looking at those, continuities. Now, that being said, everything I said I consider to be canon, and that's how I look at it. Moving forward, I'm now going to briefly discuss timelines in Dragon Ball and how they work and how they don't work. So, if you look at it from the lens of Dragon Ball Heroes and Dragon Ball Xenoverse, every continuity kind of works like how they work in comics, where a different event leads to a different timeline, and that new timeline is a new continuity, but it's still canon, it's just not the same continuity you're always following. So, for example, there's a world where Spider-Man killed Kraven the Hunter. So in that world, he becomes Kraven the Hunter. And that's a canon story, it's in continuity, but it didn't happen to the Spider-Man that we always follow. In that same vein, you could say Dragon Ball starts, the timeline starts wherever you want, with the birth of Majin Buu at the beginning of the universe, I guess. And then from there, you go to the Kaioshin or Zeno or however that works. That's a thing I'll have to talk about in the future. It doesn't all gel perfectly because Toriyama has changed a lot in the last 20 years. But that being said, it goes from the birth of Kid Buu to whatever the gods are doing at the time. And then we have the legend of the Super Saiyajin. And then from there, we skip ahead several years to when Kakaroto was born, and in the episode of Bardock timeline, he sends Goku to Earth. However, in the Dragon Ball Minus timeline, Goku does not get sent to Earth, and instead he's raised on the planet for 3 years, and then he's sent to Earth at that point. And then the timelines diverge. And that's another thing I find interesting about the Dragon Ball community. They've kind of caught on to this concept and are trying to decide when the timeline changed. And a lot of people talk about Mai and Shu and Pilaf and them being the change in the timeline. But then you can find instances like this further back where Bardock is two completely different people. And if you look at, like I said, Xenoverse and Dragon Ball Heroes, they view timelines as being infinite, and so there's an infinite possibilities with infinite timelines occurring at all times, and it's hard to fathom all the different combinations you get. Now, in the Dragon Ball Super anime and the Dragon Ball Super manga, they only present us with 4 timelines, which are the 4 we are shown in the, Dragon Ball franchise. There's the timeline where Cell comes from, the unseen timeline where everything's fixed, Trunks' timeline, and then there's the timeline that we follow. So, it kind of makes sense why Dragon Ball Heroes and Dragon Ball Xenoverse focus so much on time travel, because without us even knowing it, the entire story we follow is a product of time being changed. It's not just the Trunks arc or the Cell arc that changed the timeline. The timeline was changed long before that. And while they only present us with 4, and then later 5 after Beerus kills Zamasu, I'm not going to get into that now. Theoretically, there should be an infinite number of timelines. And that's not even to mention the fact that they also work on bubble universe theory. So in addition to there being multiple timelines, infinite in the Xenoverse and Dragon Ball Heroes continuity, which again sort of encompasses all continuity, but in addition to there being infinite timelines, potentially anyway, I don't want to get too much into that topic, but in addition to that, there's also 12 universes, which all share that same timeline. So in addition to a timeline being created every time history is changed, there's also a new 12 universes created along with that timeline. Now, those other universes probably won't be affected by the change of the timeline too much, but they will exist and be different in that regard, that they're no longer part of the old time stream. And I really just wanted to get this video out there because I wanted to talk about how I look at Dragon Ball continuity and how we're going to be looking at it from the frame of future videos. And I also briefly wanted to talk about the timelines and how they work and what's been done. I didn't talk about the contradiction made in the Dragon Ball Super anime because I didn't feel like ranting or raving or getting into it right now. But I really want to thank everyone for watching. I tried to make this a shorter video because apparently the length isn't for some of the newcomers to the channel. And speaking of, as we're wrapping up, I'd like to thank everyone for getting us to over 100 subscribers. As I promised, we'll be doing a podcast live where you guys can ask us questions, etc., etc. We're just waiting for free time. As I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but Victor and myself are wrestlers, and so we've been competing pretty hardcore lately, but our last competition should be Saturday, and after that, we'll be free to just openly discuss and do this podcast with you guys. So thank you to all the new subscribers. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. I'm glad to have you with us. Remember to like, share, comment, favorite, and subscribe if you're new. You can only keep the Supreme Duo going strong, and we're glad to be going strong with you. This has been Taf 108 of the Supreme Duo channel, and I'm signing out. Catch you guys later. Have a great day.